Okay, good evening. A quorum being present, the Board of Sewer Commissioners' June 4th meeting is now called to order. Our clerk, Sue Sweeney, is absent this evening, so before we do a roll call, we're going to need a clerk pro tem, so we'll have to take a vote. So would anybody like to volunteer?
I nominate Mac.
Donna, could I?
Second.
Mac has been nominated to be the clerk pro tem. It's been seconded by Donna. So we'll take a vote. All
Aye.
those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those who abstain? None. And all those not in favor? Did that backwards. Okay, so the meeting minutes, the next order is the roll call. I'm
Roll call.
sorry.
We'll do that. Jim Gibberti,
Present.
Marilyn Jordan,
Present.
and Donna Brandt.
Present.
Malcolm White, temporary clerk,
Pro tem.
present.
Okay, so now we will have the approval of the meeting minutes. We have the May 14th minutes in front of us and the May 21st. Did everybody I'm sure got a chance to read them over. Are there any corrections to the May 14th meeting minutes?
No, Madam Chairman, I make a motion that we approve them.
Okay, I have a motion that we approve them
Second.
as written. Jim seconded them. So all those in favor of approving them as written?
Aye.
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 All those not in favor? And all those who abstain? Okay. We're going to do the same thing with the May 21st minutes. If you could give me a motion, Donna, to...
So moved.
Second.
Okay. This is a motion to approve the May 21st minutes as written. All those in favor?
Aye.
Against? And abstain, okay. It's unanimous, all righty. So the next thing we're going to do is we have a presentation from CZM Coastal Zone Management. This is a first presentation to us. So if they would like to come up and state your name.
So my name is Mark Drainville with consulting firm GHD.
And I'm Anastasia Vadenko, also a GHD.
CZM is the funding agency for the project.
Right.
So we've been working on a project that has been mostly funded through the CZM. It's mostly a grant. And we gave a presentation about a month and a half or so ago to the selectmen. We're going to give you a similar presentation to bring you up to speed on the project, and then we're going to take it a little bit a step further too. Okay.
Excuse me, could I ask you to shut those lights off in the back of the room? Thank you.
Shut them off.
Yeah.
So the first part is going to be a kind of a background on the project, and then we're going to talk about some methodologies that we're going to be using to, to complete the project. And then we'll conclude by talking about, in a little bit more detail about what those next steps are. I want to start by just introducing a topic to you. A very common term that's used when you're looking at flood events is the 100-year flood. That's a fairly common term that you'll hear. It's a term that's kind of being phased out, and part of the reason for that is because we have in recent years been seeing multiple 100-year flood events occurring close to each other, and it causes some confusion as these 100-year flood events occur more frequently. There's a, I guess, misunderstanding as to why you would have a 100-year flood event occurring more than once in 100 years. So there's a new term that's being used, and I'm going to try to use that throughout the presentation. It's called what is it called?
The annual percent chance. So the 100-year flood is the 1% annual chance of flooding.
it's a little bit of a clumsy term. The 100-year flood kind of rolls off your tongue. But one of the things that we are looking to do is to look at the wastewater infrastructure to see where it stands relative to flood elevations within the town. And primarily it's the 100-year flood, or this 1% annual flood event. That is the most common design condition, is this 1% flood condition. One of the things that we need to do is look historically at the town to see, what have you experienced in the past? Because if you've experienced multiple so-called 100-year events, then we need to take a closer look at looking at more extreme events than just the 100-year. So the FEMA, the organization that produces flood maps for all communities, they produced a kind of a history of different towns and what those flood events have been, or these extreme flood events. And the big flood events that have occurred in Wareham have been the 1938 and the 1954 hurricanes. Neither one of those hurricanes produced a 100-year event here. They were actually slightly less. The 38 hurricane was the more extreme of the two. That's an 85-year flood. And then the 1954 was a 70-year flood event. So, what we're looking at as part of this study in looking at the 100-year flood, or this 1% chance flood, it's actually a more extreme event than you've seen here in town. So it's valid for us to be looking at that 100-year event. These are just a couple of pictures that we found in some reports, just showing what had occurred in the town. Both of these are from the 1954 hurricane events. And, one of the things that's happened more recently is these 100-year floods, elevations are changing. And due to climate change or whatever, they are changing. And so these events are leading to higher elevations. And you'll see as we go through this presentation, some of the infrastructure is a little bit lower than it needs to be protected from these new elevations. And another very critical thing that we're looking at too is what is the potential increase in these flood elevations over time due to predicted sea level rise. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. So the grant is really primarily based on looking at the infrastructure, where it stands relative to the 100-year flood, and to be able to come up with a plan to protect it as projected sea level rise occurs over time. So the town was awarded a grant through the Coastal Community Resilience Grant Program, which is administered by CZM. The project cost in total is $125,000, and the town got a 75% grant. They have a 25% share. And the objectives of the project primarily are to conduct a risk and vulnerability assessment, specifically as it relates to coastal flooding and climate change, and then to provide some recommended improvements for the infrastructure. Primarily it's pump stations. In your case here, the wastewater treatment facility is protected from flood levels. And then to come up with an emergency plan for this infrastructure. So in coming up with a design flood elevation to be able to compare against the pump stations, there's a couple of things we need to consider. One of them is, what are the flood levels that FEMA has projected? The second thing is, what is the projected sea level rise? And the third item is to consider some freeboard. Freeboard is basically a safety factor. All right, so we as engineers, we calculate items, and then we'll add a little bit of safety factor, because what we're doing is all of these things are based on models to predict nature, but nature doesn't follow the models necessarily. So, so those are the three factors that come into play here. This is the sea level rise projections that are for the Boston area. Actually, this is for Woods Hole. So this is the closest station to you for sea level rise projections. What you see here are 4 different models. We are charged with coming up with one of those models to use as part of the planning purposes here. And, you know, these models are based on different events occurring in the world. Different rates of melting of the glaciers, warming of the oceans. It's kind of hard for me to tell you exactly which one of these curves is going to happen, but we have to assume something. And what we did is we assumed not the most extreme and not the most conservative, but something in the middle. And what you see here is two different years. We're in the year 2015 right now. The logic behind the 2035 date is that's 20 years from now. That's about the amount of time you would expect mechanical equipment to last. And then the year 2065 is 50 years, and that's looking at concrete and masonry infrastructure and the length of time you would expect that to last. So we're looking at a couple of different sea level rise events. This is a map of the town showing the different flood elevations. There's many different kinds of flood zones, but the primary ones that we're looking at here are the purple area, which is an area that's subject to wave action greater than 3 feet. So those are the areas that are exposed to great fluctuations in wave action. The blue area represents 100-year flood areas where you have less than 3 feet of wave action. The orange area represents the 500-year flood. That's not an area that we're considering as part of this work. There's a sufficiently low chance that those areas are going to be hit by a flood elevation, so those are not part of this evaluation. And anything that doesn't have any kind of coloring is a less frequent than the 500-year flood. So we're really looking at the purple and the blue areas as part of this study. This is a blow-up of a certain part of that map I just showed you. And when you look at this, you can pick out some of the pumping stations in town here. So if you start at the bottom, you see the Ruggles Station. That's in a purple area, Smith. And then you could see a bunch of other stations that are in the blue area. If you go to the top, you could see Apple Street and Indian Neck and Avenue A Street. So all of these stations lie within either a what's called a velocity zone or an AE zone, depending on the impact that the wave action will have. This is an example of, this is the Ruggles pump station. So all of these stations were presumably designed at the time to withstand the 100-year flood. This is one example of where this station stands right now, and the green line represents the 100-year flood, and the other lines just represent sea level rise and then freeboard. So we're looking at either something that's, you could see on the left-hand side, that's the door. So just looking at the base flood elevation, we're looking at something that's halfway up the door at this point. This is a station, the narrow station downtown here. Not quite as bad, but still the change in the flood elevation, you could see the projected water level will get potentially as high as the midpoint of the door. But they're not all in a bad spot. You could see this station, the Kennedy Lane. All of the flood levels are below, so they're not all in a bad spot. So this is an example of one that's not in a bad area. This pie chart just shows all of the pump stations in town and what zones they lie within. The ones to focus on the right-hand side are the AE zones, and then at the bottom the VE. So that's the 100-year and then the velocity zone. So there's a total of 28 out of the 43 stations that are in a vulnerable area. And the concerns that come into play with this, as you saw with where the water levels are with the different stations, are inaccessibility to those structures, just being able to get inside, destruction of mechanical equipment, or potentially destruction of the building as a whole. I'm going to turn it over to Anastasia here, and she's going to talk to you about the methodology. Are there any questions before we talk about methodology?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The grant itself said that we were going to receive a risk vulnerability assessment, an emergency management plan, but most importantly, we were going to get recommendations for infrastructure upgrades. So we haven't, when you go through this, can you kind of point that out, where that's going to be in our draft?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So, you know, what I've just given you some background so far. What we're going to talk about next are the steps that we're going to use to come up with the recommended plan. We'll be coming before you again to talk to you about the recommended plan, okay? So right now, this is an intermediate step. You'll have to bear with us a little bit. It's going to be a little bit dry, but it's going to talk a little bit about how we're going to do the evaluation. And so we'll be coming before you again to talk about recommended improvements.
When you come before us again, I notice we do have the survey, we do have the pump station survey, although I was a little disappointed that you didn't say what you did do a locus on it, but you didn't say what pump station it was. As you showed on that list, it wasn't written on those pictures, that this was the Ruggles,
where it
this was
was.
the Narrows.
Okay.
So we kind of had a guesstimate which one it was by what we knew. So considering that we have you guys did the capital improvement plan, which many of these fall into, there's the 8 highly critical ones, and then you just have told us that there's 28 that are below sea level. Will these recommendations going forward encompass the cost that it's going to take to either repair it or replace it, and that will all be in the draft? That's what I can expect to see in the draft,
Yes.
as well as pictures saying this is it. Who's going to go out and do the actual photos of this?
We have a lot of those from site visits we've conducted already.
You do?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think I understand what you're asking for. So with each station, we could provide a locus, so you see where in the town it is. So we would definitely.
Well, I don't really
include
need the locus, I just need you to identify, this is the Narrows, this is the Ruggles Street, this is Kennedy Lane,
that.
so that we have a list of those, so that when we look at them, we're not having to go to the map and say, oh, that's this one, or take a ride out there.
Sure, yeah. Well, the purpose of showing the stations now are merely to show you examples. It wasn't to show you a solution. It's really just to show, you know, if a pump station has, is in a bad spot, why is it? But we will, in the next phase, you will see something more detailed that will show, you know, some proposed solutions.
Okay.
Okay.
You're ahead of the engineers.
Huh?
I said you're ahead of the engineers.
Any other questions, just general questions about flood elevations or sea level rise or anything like that?
Anybody on the board? No?
I'm following it so far.
So Anastasia's going to take it from here, and she's going to talk about the methodology that we're going to be using. When we came before you to talk to you about the CIP before, you might remember we came up with a method of prioritizing.
Right.
And you'll see something, there's a different kind of method that's used here. It's called risk, and you'll see an equation that's used to come up with, assign a dollar value to risk, and that's how these will be prioritized. So it's a little bit of a different method, but still there'll be a way of prioritizing. So Anastasia's going to talk about the risk and vulnerability assessment, and then talk about how we're going to do the infrastructure improvement plan, and then a little bit about the emergency management plan. We have a meeting next week where we're going to be talking in a bit more detail with our project group, and then we'll be taking the final step to develop a draft document, which we would present to you before we finalize anything.
Right. Is there going to be, is that part of this, it says you had a public workshop. You must have had that with the previous Board of Sewer Commissioners back in March, or actually it was back in February, workshop 1.
I forgot when it was, but it was with the selectmen. We had
It was February 12th.
Okay. Yeah, we had a presentation before the selectmen.
So that was the public workshop.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is public workshop 2?
2.
Okay, so we're about where we should be as far as the timeline goes. We're not behind.
Right. Yep.
Because I know this ends July 31st, I believe. Is that correct?
It's been extended past that.
No,
Well, originally it was going to be June 30th, but now it's gone past July 31st as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the draft should be done in July, and we would like to be able to produce a final by mid-August is the plan, so.
So there will be a chance for comment if there's something that we see that we need?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Right. Sure.
Also, Madam Chairman, Dave Janik is here. He's from Coastal Zone Management, so if you have any questions specific
Oh, okay.
deadlines and whatnot, you could probably address them for you.
Thank you, Guy.
Right. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt and ask. The first step that we're going to take as we develop the draft report is to come up with a risk and vulnerability assessment. The purpose of this is to identify what components within the town's wastewater infrastructure are vulnerable, and then to assign a monetary risk value. This is a methodology that's outlined in the American Water Works Association guide. It's an industry standard for coming up with a risk analysis. There's 4 steps to the process. The first is to determine what the 1% annual chance of flooding is in the 3 scenarios that Mark talked about. We're looking at the current situation, 2035, and 2065. The next step is to determine which components within the different pump stations that are in the 100-year floodplain might be damaged or ruined by that flooding event and what the replacement costs are. With that information, we can come up with an estimated monetary total loss, which will include both the tangible repair and replacement costs and also intangible costs, such as environmental cleanup that you might need to do if you have sewage spill in some of these pumping stations, or denial of service to other assets. So if you have critical infrastructure on that pumping station and the purpose of that critical infrastructure is interrupted because the pumping station's not working, you can assign a cost to that. So as Mark mentioned, there's 28 pumping stations that are within the 100-year flood zone or within the BE zone. By going through this methodology, you can come up with a way to prioritize to be able to address the most critical and the biggest risk to the town first. Those 2 components are used in an equation, the threat of likelihood, which is 0.01 for a 100-year storm, times the monetary total loss will give you the flood risk. In going through the methodology, there's a series of questions that need to be answered in order to identify the vulnerabilities. One of them is to conduct site visits to all the pumping stations to determine if water can get into the building. So this is East Boulevard. It's a pumping station that has a sealed door, but as you can see below the 100-year flood elevation, there are vents near the top of the pumping station. So this is a point of entry of water. So even though you have the flood-proof door, you would still be getting water into the building. So that's something that would need to be addressed. When this pump station was likely to, sorry.
I have a question. So
Yes.
in our draft, we will have these types of pictures
Yes.
saying that this is what's wrong, this is how much it's going to cost to fix it, and this
Yes.
has to be done right away.
Yes, and it will be pump station by pump station for all
Okay.
the vulnerable.
And I just want to make sure that you all understand one thing. Could you just go back
Yeah,
to
of course.
that equation? So at the bottom there, what enters into this equation is not only the cost of the pump station, but it's really the threat of not having that pump station. What other costs could result from not having that pump station? And if you remember when we were here a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how there are some pump stations that are really very, very critical because they serve a bunch of other stations coming in. So, you know, a lot of that has to come into play with this. So you can probably imagine that there are some stations, if they serve many, others are going to rise up on that list. And so.
Right, and this is a station that likely when it was designed, the 100-year flood level would have been beyond those vents, but it's changed since. Another thing to look at is whether there are any electrical components that are above the floodplain. So in this instance, you would have the floodwaters going halfway up that electrical box in the upper right-hand corner, and you would lose electrical power to the station. The other things to look at is whether the building is constructed using flood-resistant materials, whether all of the gas storage tanks and gas cylinders are anchored and wouldn't become buoyant and float away. whether all the HVAC equipment is above the flood elevation, whether there's backflow valves on any of the drain and the sewer lines coming into the pump stations, and whether there's alternative power available if you do lose power during the storm. I'm gonna walk through two examples just to give the two bookends of the extremities of the risk. The first is Onset Pier. It's a pumping station. So the graphic on the lower right-hand corner is a dependency schematic. The 6 pumping stations to the right of the one that's circled, which is Onset Pier, all flow into Onset Pier. So if you lose it, you're gonna be affecting the operation of all 7 pumping stations. Because the water is coming halfway up the building, you have a large water load on the outside of the building, so there's a potential for structural failure of that building. Additionally, the door isn't watertight, so you'd be getting water into the building, and you would likely lose the generator that's in there and all the mechanical and the electrical equipment. When you add up all the costs of that, you have a very large total loss times the likelihood of threat, and that's the risk that the town is carrying for this particular pumping station. The next example is Leonard Street. This is a pumping station that doesn't have any other dependent pumping stations on it. It has submersible pumps, so they're designed to be in water. And as you can see in the 100-year, you're just touching the bottom of the concrete. So in the future, you might lose that electrical box, but in the 100-year, you likely wouldn't. So there is a risk in the future, but it's much less monetary loss. You would have to replace the electrical control panel, and you would lose that station for a period of time until you could make the repairs. But it's a lower monetary loss times the likelihood of failure, and you get your risk. So in the draft report, we'll have pump station by pump station, and you'll be able to come up with the risks for each one of these. Once we've come up with a risk value, we'll come up with proposed infrastructure improvements for every one of the pump stations. The first step is to identify feasible mitigation measures and to evaluate the different alternatives in order to be able to come up with the most cost-effective evaluation. And then for each pumping station, the decision will need to be made whether you want to implement those mitigation measures, or whether it's more cost-effective to let the pump station flood and to perform emergency repairs in the event of a flood. And that will be decided for every pumping station. EPA recommends 4 different options for flood resilience for pump stations, which I'll walk through quickly. The first thing you can do is called dry flood proofing, and what you're doing is you're making your structure watertight so that water can't enter the building. If you have more than 2 to 3 feet water, you're actually putting a very large load on that superstructure. So FEMA doesn't recommend that you do it where you see flood elevations for more than 2 to 3 feet. If you'll remember, one of the pump stations that we showed earlier, you had water halfway up the building. It's also not permitted in V or coastal A zones, and it's not recommended for areas where flooding is expected to persist for over 12 hours. Because you're increasing the chance of water getting into that building and for structural failure. But for areas where you see 1 to 2 feet, this might be the most cost-effective option. And these are some of the different recommended measures that you could take for buildings with 1 to 2 feet of water. For very minor floods, you could invest in sandbags to keep the water out of the perimeter of the building. For many of the submersible pump stations, they have vents that come up from the wet wells. So a simple solution might be to raise that vent above the flood line. And then there's options where you can form barriers, such as flood walls and levees and sealed doors. The one in the middle is a flood wall that can be put into the doors. And then the one on the right is actually the East Boulevard door. That's a sealed door that won't let water in. Yes?
Out of curiosity, on the dry proofing.
Yeah.
You've got the submersible one over there. Now, what's contained within that submersible one? Just the pumps like the other pump stations?
Yes.
Why wouldn't it make sense to make all the pump stations like that?
Some of this, yeah, I can tell you that there's some some of the pumps become very large and they become very difficult to deal with. I guess in some cases it could be a preference. They may not be made in a certain size. It's something that could be explored.
I was gonna say, I mean, how many pumps are we talking about system-wide for us?
As far as pumps that are in that situation,
No, ones that are inaccessible to be put in something like that.
well, your bigger stations, you got your Narrows, Dicks, Cohasset Narrows, Heinz Fields, your bigger stations to put the wet well, as you call the submersible pumps. They will be huge, because these pumps are doing 1,000 to 2,000 gallons per minute. They'd be huge, so that dry well, or wet well, you would have to be quite huge. And then also there's elevation considerations as you move water from one point to the next. So some of these wells would have to be quite deep, so
But
I
if the
think
dry
that's a
well,
consideration.
if the dry well is gonna prevent flooding,
I'm
and
not-
handle the job, just because it has to be larger, what's wrong with that?
Well, you're talking about coming back and doing that. If it was done in the beginning, so let's say that we're gonna do some building in the future, then I think that would be a prime consideration. But to go and take Narrows pump station and to do what you're asking to do, I think that may be cost prohibitive. It's worth looking at as far as a solution, but I think it probably would be cost prohibitive to do that to Narrows.
But I would think it would be worthwhile to consider that for
Well,
all of
I'm-
the stations that have to be rehabbed, and then make the decision whether or
Absolutely.
not an individual one should be done that way.
I
And
think that's part of what she's doing in that assessment. It's part of what they're going to do, look at all the alternatives, and some may seem ridiculous and some may not, but you consider all the alternatives, which is gonna be part of their assessment when they get to that part of repairs and whatnot.
And so that solution would be wet flood proofing. In this case, what you're doing is you're using flood damage resistant materials. So you would be using pumps that can be inundated, and construction techniques to minimize the flood damage. So it is something that will be considered in the draft report. 2 times that this should be considered is if the required pump station improvements are not cost effective or feasible. So the pump station on the left is Bay Street, and you see the electrical panel, which is on the street right now. In order to raise it above the flood elevation and have your freeboard, you're gonna raise it about 10 feet, which is, it's hard for maintenance. So it's not really a feasible solution. So this is something that you would look at installing an electrical panel that could get wet. And the one on the right is a structural concern. Once you have that much water pushing against the building, you're risking failure. So in that case, it's probably better to let the water into the building and to upgrade the equipment inside the building so that it can get wet. There's different methods of wet flood proofing. Just to touch on a few of them, one would be to raise the equipment inside the pump station above the flood level. The picture on the right is the Narrows pumping station, and that's the generator that's sitting up above the 100-year flood level. Another option that could be considered is to relocate electrical components. So there's an option where you could put control panels, say, in a portable trailer, and when you know a flood's coming, you can pull those out, you can shut the pump station down, save your equipment, and then once the flood event is over, it's very quick to reinstate that pump station again with minimal losses. Third consideration is maintaining operations. So we're going to be looking at what options the pump stations have to continue serving if you lose the grid. 2 options are to either have portable generators or permanent generators. And then when you're looking at upgrading equipment, to install more energy efficient equipment so that you have a smaller load on the station that you're trying to cover with your generator. And also potentially to replace pumps with diesel drive so that they're not dependent on the grid. And all of these are the generic options that EPA offers, so we'll be looking at site-specific conditions to see which ones are most applicable, and some of them may not be at all. The 4th option that EPA recommends is providing the ability to bypass the station. Some options for this is to maintain a call list of vendors that can pump from the upstream manhole to the downstream manhole. And this is something actually the town does now. You can have a septic hauler or a different vendor come. So if you lose that station, you can still control the flow of wastewater and keep sending it downstream. Another thing to look at is having portable pumps to be able to bring the stations back online as fast as possible if you damage the equipment. And another option might be to look at a regionalization. Where else can the wastewater go? And that's something that might not be applicable to this community. The last thing that I want to touch on very quickly, as part of this project, we'll also be developing an emergency response plan. And this is going to provide a protocol for when an event happens, what the different lines of communication are, and what the different action plans are of what you should be doing in order to minimize the damage as much as possible. And it'll be 8 sections. So the next time that we come before you, we'll be presenting the findings of the draft report using the methodologies that I just talked about. Does anybody have any questions on the methodologies?
I don't have any on the methodologies, but
Okay.
I do have some on what you perceive as, this is phase 1, where we identified everything, and now what are you recommending for phase 2? Saying the draft is done, phase 2, what's your recommendations going forward? In other words, is there more money available, more grants available? I know there was 350 from CZM, and we, I don't know if there's a deadline, if there's any more money available for grants, so that, I mean, our option 2 ideally would be to go directly to repairs, design and remediation.
So there are local CZM grants that come available. There's a cycle that's that we're in right now. There's a new one starting. There are federal opportunities for grants too, both through NOAA and I think it's FEMA too. Yeah, and so there are multiple opportunities for grants going forward.
But would they be grants for remediation, design and remediation? Would we
yes.
fit that? How do you see us fitting into that?
I do see you fitting into it. I mean, I'll give you an example. We're doing a project right now through the Mass CZM for the town of Oak Bluffs, and we are putting in, putting in a generator at a higher elevation and doing some other things to help their existing infrastructure. So these grants fund infrastructure improvements, design, construction. We just have to find the right ones, but there are grants that are available for this.
So we could apply for more money to do these upgrades, because the money from this particular one, the deadline is passed. There's no more.
Right.
Okay.
What the best situation would be for the report to be completed, and then once there's a plan outlined and the priority of these stations is shown, then you can use that report to help pursue other grants, based on that priority.
So can I also ask you, can you explain to me what the partnership is between your organization, GHD, your company, Green Seal, and how that plays out?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm Russ Kleekamp, engineer with GHD, formerly with Green Seal. It's kind of an interesting dynamic how this came about. You had a good question with the grants and how these things help, and let me just add a little bit more to that. One of the purpose with a grant like this assessment that identifies multiple pump stations, you'll have a lot of work in front of you. It's not going to be a one or two little things, but really the beauty of it when you have, say, there's 20 pump stations that are identified, each year you can start tackling those. The more successful grants you have for that, the more other agencies take notice. We've had very successful approaches in the towns of Provincetown, Orleans, and Brewster with similar types of grant strategies that have ended up in millions of dollars of grants for the town. So the best attribute for a grant is a governing body or an entity who is proactive and who wants to go after them. With your support, I think it could be a very successful future. The development of the relationship between Green Seal, GHD, and the town of Wareham and CZM is that when I was with Green Seal, we put the grant together for the water pollution control facility. The grant application included a write-up, a narrative of what we're going to do, and resumes of the individuals from GHD and then also from Green Seal. Green Seal Environmental, they performed all the pump station surveys, so all these photographs that you see with the
Right.
elevations, they went out to the 46 pump stations and did all the field work for that. So that was Green Seal's involvement. And then GHD was doing the remainder of the work, coming up with the methodology and the draft report and ultimately the final.
Our specialty is wastewater infrastructure, and so the teaming came from Green Seal providing the field work, the surveys, and we provide the knowledge of the wastewater infrastructure and improvements related to that.
So going forward, if staying on the same lines of being proactive, if we, once we get this and we end up applying for another grant, who would be writing the grant? Would it be GH, or would it be Green Seal again?
It would ultimately be whoever's best suited to write the grant, depending on specifically what it is. Me personally, I've done quite a few grants now, so I would have some involvement, but depending on the level of service, Green Seal offers services that GHD does not offer. They offer some field survey services, they offer different environmental services that GHD locally doesn't offer, so we would have to, depending on what the projects are, team with them. They would likely have some involvement. I'd have to get information from them if the grant was to be, or the application was to be written. But we would really have to make a judgment call on who the best entity is to write that. It would be involved to some degree. But one way or another would make sure the right person writes the grant for the town.
And Madam Chairman, that's the decision of the board also.
Right.
Everything would be coming from the board, and everything would be presented to the board, and the board would make the final decision, or at least recommend the way to go. So I think the ultimate answer is the board. You're the board, so we look to you for guidance.
Okay. And I guess I have one other question. There was supposed to be a public workshop for existing conditions analysis. I was reading the grant and the timetable. Was that done, or did I miss that somehow? An existing conditions analysis report?
That was the pump station,
The first presentation.
yeah, first presentation, just talking about the situation that each of the pump stations is in relative to flood elevations. I summarized it here by giving a couple of examples, and then that pie chart just showed that 28 pump stations that lie within the vulnerable zones.
So when you look at the capital improvement plan that you put together, and you now look at this risk and plan that you're putting together, and you identify that maybe 8 of those, the Narrows being one, which seems to be the highest priority, that would be our first priority, and then we'll go down from there.
It's highly likely, I mean, we haven't done the risk numbers
Well,
yet,
just
but
from the
it's
paperwork.
highly likely that the Narrows is going to be, if not number one, very close. And so, I agree. You're probably going to see that at the top of both lists.
So that, again, going back to my option is that we've done the studies, and being a proactive board and wanting to move forward, the draft, you say it's been extended again to August
For the final.
for the final?
Yep.
So we would need that before we move ahead with our next grant application to
Yeah.
get the, okay.
Correct.
Yeah, great.
Typically, when the report is done, then that would be the opportunity to start looking for the other grants as they become available.
Okay. Okay, does anybody else on the board have any questions?
No, I'm good.
Jim?
All set for the moment.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. All right, I don't know if you have any more, or if you want to add anything, other than when you'll see us again. I think on my calendar, I had you coming in, well, actually, I had you coming in the 4th, but now that's changed with the dates, right?
Yeah, it's coming on the 4th
This is the 4th, and then I had you coming in again
Correct, I think in early.
in July.
Yeah, it's going to be at some point in July. Yep.
So in July, when you come in, will you have this draft and you'll have all my pictures and my
We will.
what's wrong
We
and
will.
let's fix it and show me
Yep.
what has to be done?
Yes.
We'll make it a point to get it to you ahead of time. I'm guessing it's probably gonna be some content in that report,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
I would think it
Yeah.
probably want 10
Yeah.
days.
Because
or-
we read all the reports.
Yeah, no,
This
that's-
group, and we go over them with a fine tooth comb and decide what we like and what we don't like, and so
Mhm.
we'd like to make our comments before we get the draft, and then a week or two later, oh, it's time for the final, and we didn't get a chance to get back to you with what our findings were.
Mhm. There'll be time for your comments, so
Okay.
there will be time.
When get the next iteration, will we be able to see some pictures of the various types of pump stations that you would propose, or the solutions that you would propose to them? So that we can see what one looks like the sunken one, the one that you.
We could do that, sure.
So,
Yeah, we could do that.
so
We'll
they
show you
have a better-
examples.
Better idea of what you're talking about than what we have right now.
Sure, yeah, we could show you examples.
Appreciate it,
Yeah.
thank you.
Did you have a question, Dave?
I just wanted to clarify, Madam Chairman, you said a little earlier that the current grant program is closed from CZM. Actually, the round of grants under which you got this grant, that closed last year, and now you're working through it. There's currently one open right now. Unfortunately, the due date for that is June 12th. So this isn't
It's
going to
not
be quite
ready.
ready for that. Hopefully, we'll have another round sometime next year around this time, but we'll have to wait and see how, how the state budget goes and how everything proceeds. But I want to make sure you knew that there is in fact one open right now. If the town had other resiliency issues besides, since this isn't ready, they would be able to sort of pursue those through the existing one that's open right now. But we do June 12th.
Okay, thank you very much. And I should get your name.
Dave Janik, Janik.
In days with the CZM, local office down the road here. And Madam Chair, we could get to Dave, he does a good job of getting out blurbs to us. We could add the sewer commissioners to that blurb.
Mhm.
So if there's something coming out with grants and whatnot, you can be added to that, and then you'll get them also.
Yeah, that would be great if you could do that.
will
I think
talk
there's a
to Dave.
monthly newsletter. It's an automatic sign-up. Maybe I can pass around that email, and every month you get an update, and the CZM website does a great job of identifying grants. It's not just this opportunity that will fund these types of projects, as mentioned before, NOAA, FEMA, they all have opportunities. And once you get one application or one grant-funded report done, that really goes a long way with the other granting agencies, because they can see that, hey, if another agency funded this, it must be important. So
Right.
it's a good strategy to build on.
That was,
Just let me know whatever emails you want me to send those notices to, and I'll make sure all of you or whatever subset would like to receive.
Well, we do have a sewer commissioner's website, not website, email address, which is, and I will write it down for you, and I will give it to you before we leave this evening. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Janik, for turning our lights back up. We must be in the dark.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
And I'll be waiting for my pictures and all my repairs and all my money, how much it's gonna cost us, with bated breath.
It's gonna make a nice Christmas card.
Yes.
So it's sewer commissioners at Wareham.
It's sewer commissioners at wareham.mass.us. And that will get to all of us, Mr. Janik.
Great, thanks.
Have a good night.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very
Good
much.
night.
All right, thanks.
Oh, that was loud. Do we have any discussion on this that we'd like to make before I do the superintendent's report?
I'm just hoping that they come up with a decent presentation for us on the sunken ones particularly, because I've dealt with those before and they work very well, and not only from the protection from water flooding, but also because it doesn't impact the neighborhood that it goes into from a visual standpoint.
Correct.
You don't have an above-ground monstrosity someplace.
Well, if we don't see enough of those at the presentation, we can certainly, those are our comments, bring us back more.
I want to say something about as we get big. There's an operational issue also, and there's also a maintenance issue. So when these pumps get quite huge, they're going to be jacked out of that well. And the wells are down 30, 40 feet, and you're going to have the equipment to bring that out. And that comes along, I just want to be very clear, because what I think we can do is we can go to the existing ones we have now. And they are, everyone you're talking about, we already have them. Just scale. We have exactly what you're talking about. And I'll take the truck out with you and pull the pumps and show you what we're doing with pumps that are only a half a ton or a ton, and what it entails to get those out of the ground. And so you can see that for yourself. But I think in their analysis, there's a operational maintenance issue that has to be considered also. And so, not that it's to be ignored, but let's consider the factors of actually running that pump station and maintaining it.
Can't they design that in the beginning?
So they could probably design a derrick, if you will, that's gonna go up 40 feet in the, I'm saying, that's,
Design an opening in the
and that's why
container.
they enclose them, because the wet wells now, the ones you're talking about, we have spiral stairs, we go down there, so the maintenance of it is, it's factored in. But to take a wet well, and like I said, we have wet wells now, and we'll take you out there and show them, in part of our tour, you'll see those pump stations, because what you're talking about, we already have in smaller scales. We even have them that has a manhole cover in the middle of the road, and you open the manhole cover, and you go into that pump station that's in the road. We have all kinds. So they're there, but now there's a maintenance issue, because I have two now that are in the road, so that means I'm shutting roads down. So again, these are all great ideas, we'll look at all of them, but we need to consider for operational and to maintain that pump station, there has to be a factor also. And so when you get these pumps that move 2,000 gallons per minute, that weigh, quite a lot, you've got to get that out of the wet well to repair it. And then if you got to clean it, that's in the road wherever you are. And so that's all I'm saying. It's just something we'll consider. And so you can see it, and then you go from there. I want to be clear on that, because we have them. We actually have them.
I understand that, but from what you're saying, you need a larger opening to get things out of than is currently existing, and why can't they go back to the drawing board and draw them in with the maintenance aspect in mind in the first place?
I understand
And still
that.
wind up with the end product that we need.
But if you got to pull a pump, if a pump's 30 feet in the ground, that means you got to be up 30 feet to get that out and plus some. So that is a heck of a crane. So that's a consider. So maybe you spend $1 million on a crane to go do those, but that's again, that is some inherent thing. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but
is
that's
in
a
the
number that's-
consideration.
But we're not gonna reinvent the wheel. We've gotta look at what they're gonna give us
Oh, yeah.
and what's the
No,
most
no, I understand.
cost-effective, because we don't have money.
They're the experts, and they're gonna come in and tell us what they're recommending and what it's gonna cost us, or what we could have and what it's gonna cost us. And we're gonna make the choices.
That's right.
And
They're
we're
the
gonna,
experts.
we're gonna have to depend on getting grant money to do this.
Well, no matter what we do, it's gonna be.
Right, and
Yeah.
so we're gonna have to be very diligent on that, and that's why I was very pushy, that we wanted to see the end result, not another study going forward. We've studied this until we're blue in the face, now it's time to move forward and fix it. We know what's wrong, let's get out there and fix it.
But Madam Chair, we can't fix it without a plan.
No, we can't, that's what this is about.
Exactly.
And then from this point, the next grant, we'll get a design, and we'll have them out
Exactly.
there fixing it.
And you may do nothing. And one particular pump station, and assume the risk and the liability, saying, okay, this may not happen, it may happen. You may say, you know what, that particular pump station, we're gonna do nothing.
Right.
We'll take the chance that it's not gonna happen. If it does, we'll make the emergency repair. So those are all the choices that you folks are gonna make with all the information to you, then you can make that choice.
Because the capital plan goes out 3-4 years. I would like to see some of these upgrades be made within the first and second year, if at all feasible with some grant money. Because if we start pushing things 3 and 4 years, we're going to get a hurricane. We've been over 20 years now without one. Something's going to happen. It always does. So we need to get to the worst ones and get them fixed as quickly as possible. That's my opinion.
Well, I agree with you, but I think you gotta go through the steps.
You do, and that's what we're going to do.
That's what we're doing. I think we're in a positive light, and we're going through the steps, and we're
Moving forward.
And, yeah, and we're being very proactive.
Okay, so now the next thing on our agenda, if there's no more discussion on that, is the sewer superintendent's report.
Do you have a copy?
No, I don't believe I have
one.
one.
Because she does the.
No, we didn't get
We
one.
didn't get one of
Okay,
those.
so she emailed, and so I'll give you that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Is
you.
your book here?
That's your book. You asked, this is you wanted to see an old, this is the wastewater management plan.
Yes, okay.
So you want, so that's it? So you can-
Thanks.
that's-
Thanks.
And I'm still working on your access to we're trying to set you up an individual site so you can go in and access all the infrastructure.
Yep.
So we haven't forgotten.
That'll be valuable.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And a couple of quick things that are not on here. We contacted the Elks. And also, Madam Chairman, I want to say to you, Ms. Brock, is that for giggles, we're running it through ethics to be sure, because you're using your private membership to
Yeah.
to get us a discount, which is
Okay.
very generous on your part. But I just want to make sure that you're protected and we're protected, that we're
Oh,
not doing
thank you.
something. So I'm doing that. And we
Thank you.
appreciate your generosity, but we're just going to make sure it's okay by the state ethics. So I'm going to start with number one, is we met with Weston Sampson, and they're the engineers for the town of Bourne wastewater. And they're rewriting the bylaws and ordinances for the town of Bourne for sewer. And so they asked for ours, and so we gave them in the bylaws we have, I think it's section 5, in some articles, and those are our bylaws for our sewer, or ordinances, if you will, but we have them as bylaws. So I gave them a copy of the bylaws, and I guess the bylaws, so when they adopt their processes, or their ordinances, it's not gonna be less than what we're doing, because we have an IMA. So they're gonna at least equal ours. So if we say that water temperature is 150 degrees, they're gonna say it's a minimum of 150 degrees, instead of saying it's 130 degrees, because we accept their wastewater. And at the end of the meeting, they were requesting a meeting with the sewer commissioners, because it's the fifth year of that. So I told them that we're working on it. So I'll get back to them with a date or whatever, but I told them we'll get back to them because we are working on it. We're aware that we have to meet in the 5th year. So that's how that went down. So I wanted to bring that to you.
I have a question on that guy.
Yes.
Did you get an answer from Attorney Bowen regarding our role in the intermunicipal agreement with the town of Bourne? The way did you get an answer from him?
No.
No.
And I was with him again today. I have no definitive answer. I think he's going to digest it. I have Bourne's opinion, but that's all I have, and they were involved.
Can you share with us Bowen's opinion?
Bourne's opinion is that, and this is through Weston Sampson in discussing with Bourne, is when Bourne did it, they did it under the sewer commissioners, because Bourne has, even though the selectmen and sewer commissioners act as both, they have 2 separate boards. So what they do is one night they have a board that acts as sewer commissioners with an individual chairman, and then another night they meet as selectmen with an individual chairman. So they never put them together. They had always separate. So when they did the IMA, they met with the sewer commissioner board that were actual selectmen, but they were the sewer commissioners. So their opinion is sewer commissioners. But that's the way they do things. We do things differently and we're differently, so we got to get our legal interpretation of how this is going to play out.
Right.
I think to enter into an agreement, the selectmen have to be involved. I think that's how it is, unless it's done at town meeting. If town meeting changes that, then that's another issue, because that's our legislators. Now, legislators can legislate. And so we, the executive boards, can do things, but the legislators, so if we're going to change anything, if that's going to change, if let's say Mr. Bowen recommends a change, that would still have to go through town meeting. So that's where we go with it, but right now, I have no answers for you.
And when's
so-
the deadline for this? When does this have to be signed by, December 31st? Because this is the 5th year?
It's a review. Now, when the two boards of sewer commissioners sit and meet, they're gonna evaluate the existing IMA. If you decide to make a change, or if Bourne would like to have a change, and you guys decide on what that change is to be, because you have an existing IMA, there's some gray area as to if you can make changes within the existing IMA, because you're not writing a new IMA. And so that's a clarification we have to get from town council.
Right.
And I think it'd be wise if we can get town council here to explain it, and we can ask him, and then you can ask him all the questions, you can do all the scenarios, and get some definitives, so at the very least, we can move forward in some meetings, and figure out, and then we can figure out what we do at all these meetings, but we should at least, fulfill our obligation of discussing with Bourne what we're gonna, the differences.
How long was Attorney Bowen? Thinking about, digesting it.
Well, it's a document that, when I read the document, there's some places that say it's totally sewer commissioners, and other places that say board of selectmen. So I get confused when I'm reading it. So in fairness, and I'm not making excuses, but I would think that he'd want to really digest it. Not only that, probably go back into the mindset of our boards when they were writing it. I think he has, because I can't just say, okay, read and give me an answer. That'd be totally unfair.
Well, it's
So-
kind of difficult where
Yeah.
the Board of Selectmen were the sewer commissioners for
That's
so
right.
many years.
Yes.
So it's gotta be a difficult, transition on that part legally.
I think so, and I think that's what's gonna happen, is I think have the legal, so we can sit down with legal, and maybe both boards sit down, and then delineate some definitive areas. I'm not so sure, but that may be the way to go about it, and so there's no confusion. Because when you start talking to Bourne, if there's nothing you can do, or
Yeah,
you
that's-
recommend,
there's no
then why are you
sense.
meeting?
Why?
And see,
Exactly.
but even though it's
Exactly.
sewer commissioners are supposed to meet, and you're the sewer commissioners, but we gotta delineate that to make very clear. And again, as I'm understanding from Bourne, and little I know, is that to write the document, it has to be executive, and because the selectmen were given that authority through the town meeting. So I would think that if we're gonna write something, it's theirs, absolutely. I don't know about manipulating it. I don't know about changing this to that, or once a year to twice a year. See, I don't know about those things, and that's what you'll be doing.
Well, I do know that the way Article 11 made the new sewer commissioner's job description was we were an advisory board only in intermunicipal agreements, that the Board of Selectmen with the signature power exclusively. So, I mean, we can meet with Bourne, we can give our advice or to the Board of Selectmen, but ultimately, they are the ones who are going to have to look at this and sign it with the town of Bourne. I don't know that's what I would like from Attorney Bowen, what exactly they consider, what they interpret our role as. Is it just advisory, or do we have any teeth? If we have no teeth, I see no reason why we should be meeting with Bourne.
I agree.
I agree. If it's, then why, again, and then, so the sewer commission, the selectmen will be acting as sewer commissioners in that negotiation, because again, there's sewer commissioner technical things that need to be resolved.
Well, that's the
And
way
so
that
I
law
think
was
this is
written.
gray there. I'm not so sure. So
Yeah.
maybe it's just to, deflect to the selectmen and say, you handle it, and maybe that blessing comes from the sewer commissioners that you can act on our behalf. I don't really know. I have no idea. But I know that we need to meet, and we need to make some decisions, and the decisions are not gonna be if we have an IMA or not have an IMA. And we're not gonna have sign a change. We're just gonna change the way we do business. As an example, we're gonna say, we're doing grease, you're gonna take care of the grease. And there's gonna be a chain of commands of issues. They had a gas spill, we're gonna talk about who's gonna handle that gas spill. Those are the kind of things we're gonna talk about. And so do the selectmen, because and technically it's not a signatory thing, it is a revision of what we're existing doing in some of the policies. So I don't really know, and I'll ask Mr. Bowen to give us a bit, maybe invite him, but ask him to give us as clear as he can, so that we can move forward, either you guys doing it as an advisory, or the selectmen doing it, one or the other. Because they're looking for an answer for their timetable also, so
Right.
that's the reason why I brought it up.
Staying on that same thing, the Sea Power contract that you received, did that go to Attorney Bowen?
Yes, Rebecca's taking care of that.
So that already went to him, or it did not yet?
To my knowledge, it went to her. I'll clarify that, because what she does is she types up into she takes their contract, attaches our contract, which talks about taxes and collusion and those type of things. She attaches them together, and she fires them over to Mr. Bowen. And she did a bunch last week, and they're starting to come back. We got 2 back, so they roll back to us, so.
Because there was that question of whether we could sign a 3 or a 4-year contract, so we need him to review that as quickly as possible, because we're losing money. The ratepayers are losing money with any delay on that one.
Exactly.
Because he asked me today if he owes us anything, and I said, I'll ask Rebecca, because she's a really good keeper. I'll find out. That's a good question. We'll definitely get the definitive answer for you.
Okay, because those are
But
those
I
are the
believe
2
she
Attorney
did.
Bowen ones, so we'll have to follow up with him. We can even shoot him an email
Yeah.
from the Board of Sewer Commissioners saying, we're looking for these 2 things,
Okay.
answers to these 2 things as quickly as you can get.
I'll ask Rebecca tomorrow to give us direction as to what she's done, and then we'll go from there. And
Okay,
then if we have to shoot an email off and say, we need it right away, but I think she's done that, because when we did it last week, she was on it, so I'm
Can
only.
you just confirm it in an email?
Yes,
yeah,
that's right. I will do that tomorrow, confirm with everyone.
okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry
No,
to
don't-
interrupt you.
No. That was C-Power. Odor issues, again, on my way here, I had some odor complaints, and it wasn't about the plant, it was some pump stations. So before I came here, I wrote the Indian Neck Pump Station, I wrote by Parkwood, Apple Street, Avenue A. And when I was at Indian Neck, I smelled a very slight odor coming out of the vent. And what happens is when water comes from, and as she had showed you, pump stations go one to the other. And so I'm sure you're probably aware of that. So as they come into a well, they displace air, and that air goes up the vent and it comes out. So what I'm going to do, when I notice a slight odor, and so and the wind may catch it right, and the neighbors may notice it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a charcoal filter on it to charcoal the odor. So so we're doing a lot of things. My point is that we're starting to look at odor, possible odor potentials, and that's one of them. So when I got the phone call, I did the investigation on my way here. In the plant itself, at this time of the year, we do a major wash down of everything. We wash and bleach, wash and bleach. So again, it's preventive, trying to minimize odors. When the truck's back in to dump, we wash that twice a day now. We wash it with bleach, the area where the trucks are, because it can get into the asphalt. The asphalt can heat up from the sun. It can emit some odors. So by washing that twice a day, putting down some bleach and cleaning it, disinfecting it, it goes a long ways to minimize them. Because the real issues with odors, there may be a little piece over here, a little piece over there, and to us it may be little, but collectively it could be annoying. So the goal is to grab all these little things so collectively they don't become an issue. So we instituted that, and we're doing it now diligently. We actually added it to our CMMS, which is our maintenance. We have a computerized maintenance program. We've actually added into that program, so it spits it out every week. Make sure you do this all week long. So it reminds us to be diligent on it throughout the summer.
So you will be putting into Indian Neck Parkwood and Avenue A, you'll be putting in charcoal filters.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right. And the quotes are all in. Last time I talked, we were waiting for one quote. They're all in. The lowest is 14. They go from $14,000 to $24,000. And that quote was along the 300 feet of basin to put a chain link fence without the chain link. And on top of that, install the nozzles that we have presently that are on top of the building that we have where the sewer trucks go, the headworks building. And so what it would be is it'll be a long line, and they're atomizers, and they're under pressure. I think it's 60 psi, and they just atomize the water and the odor counteractor, and they'll fall down. So if the wind takes it across, it'll fall into the wind, it'll fall into the odor, and if there's any escaping odor, it'll wrap itself around it, neutralize it. Kind of looks like Febreze. If anybody's ever used Febreze, it's the same concept. So I'm looking at the budget, and if I don't do it June, it'll definitely be done July 1 when we have a new budget. But it will be done very soon. So it's because it's a budget issue for me. We've had a lot of expenses we didn't even count on this winter, and they're adding up. And so I'll be coming to this board soon to ask you to transfer $111,000 out of our emergency funds and into our expenditures, because our sludge is going to be shot, electricity is going to be shot. We spent a lot of money electrical-wise. We ran a lot more equipment, and we moved a lot more sludge out. So a lot of things happened. So I'll bring it with an explanation to transfer the money from our emergency fund into our budget to make the payments. So I'll be doing that shortly also.
And this $14,000 is not in your budget?
Correct.
So that will be part of this 1,100?
It could be part of the 111,000.
111,000.
I have a question.
Yes.
You have your regular budget that you work with. You get a printout every month of where you're at with your budget?
Yes, I do. Lee does a great job. And let's have an example. So what happens is, to give you an example, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, yes, I'm sorry. What I do, and I do this on a weekly basis. And so what she gives me is here's my budget. And I break it down. So as an example, here's my expenses, and I'll pass it around. So what I do is I track the numbers, where I am, what I've got left. And so we do this each and every week. So I follow my budget, so I do some on the back page. So we know exactly where I am. And so, just an example, this is $331,000. What is this? I don't know where it is. And this is debt. So we budgeted $2.4 million. We spent $2,093,000, and we have $333 left in that budget. So we follow it each week. And so as John makes payments, it hits that account, we see it, and we deduct it. So we know right to every week what we have. We do it weekly. The town reconciles monthly, we're behind. Like right now, we're reconciling with the town in April. It was April we're reconciling now. We reconcile it weekly. So because our budget is so large and crazy that we need to know each week what we're spending, because I could do it all that quick. So Lee does this every single week. And every time, when you sign the bills, when you're done with the bills, all those numbers are deducted. And so that's how, and these are open purchase orders, and these are our payroll, we're paying folks, and what the time is, so we do it, yes, so. And that's what I'm saying, I'm watching it down, I can see some numbers that are in the negative, and I'm saying, okay, and I'm looking at numbers that are gonna be in the positive, because we have a bottom line budget. And so now I'm playing with the numbers, okay, my bottom line is this, and I have this, but this is gonna be short 20,000, but this has a surplus of 40,000, so I'm really 20,000 to the good. So that's the game we're playing right now to make sure. So.
Yeah, because you can see that right here,
It would
Donna,
be
in
helpful,
this.
I know, but it would be helpful if we had something like this on a monthly basis.
You can have that,
No,
we can straight up.
You know, it would be helpful to,
Well,
to follow.
she does those weekly,
Yes, no,
so
we
it's
can.
probably
Okay.
easier to see them weekly,
well, that's fine, I
weekly
just
than
didn't
it
wanna
is
put a
monthly.
burden on.
It's just a matter of purchase, she prints them out for me, we just print
Oh,
out 5
okay.
copies.
Okay, it
She
would,
does, every Monday morning I
you know,
have
it'd
this
be
in my
helpful
box.
to be able to follow something like that.
Yep.
Don't you agree, guys?
Every Monday she.
It's similar to what I had spoken to you about, Jim,
Income.
seeing what our payables were every
Right.
week, because they are surprisingly huge.
Huge,
And
yeah.
I don't think the people realize how expensive it is to run this wastewater plant. It's not,
No, no,
it's not cheap.
no.
So that's how we do it, so,
You know, that
you're right, so we watch it
income
closely,
statement
we
to-
try to,
or
we really try.
Get the income.
Mm-hmm.
You seen
And
this?
that way
Jeff?
we could ask you, you know,
Not that
how
I
come
think
you're
I have.
over on this certain thing, and
But I
you just
got
tell, you know, what,
No, I haven't seen
what I
this.
used to
like
do,
this.
and we used to have every month, and you'd have your budget, and then you'd have your actual expenses, and then we'd have to do, you'd have your variation, and we'd do an explanation if we were over or under, why we were over or under. That way, my boss knew what was going on all the time, and I kinda look for something like that. I'm not asking you to do a
No, no,
very,
it's-
just to be able to explain it to us, that we
Absolutely.
can look at it and see where we're at.
Absolutely.
Because financially, you know, that's what I look at.
And it's important too, because as we do a budget, we try to draw off of previous years, this is to get an idea. because
Exactly.
It's a year-to-year thing, and we're making our best guess, this is what we've been spending average. But we could, like this year, the winter was so crazy, electrical budget, throw it out the window. So
Yeah.
some of you just throw them out, so this becomes an aberration. But when we factor it in the long term, we don't have to say, oh, we did, 200,000 this year, we do the same. No, we may go back to a 170 because it's a crazy year, but this is what's gonna help us get to that point. So yeah, we do this quite regularly. Actually, each week I get this.
Okay.
It was Frank Heath told me one thing I'll never forget. He said, numbers tells you how you're doing, how your job. You take the numbers each week, it tells you how your plant really is running.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what he said.
And Frank's a wise man.
Numbers tell a story.
They do.
So we look at numbers every week just to make sure. It gives me an idea how bad I'm doing or how good I'm doing. Or a particular line and things, so anyways, so that's.
Does the rest of the board?
Yeah, I think that, is everyone in agreement with that, the rest of the board members?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, yes,
You want a copy? Okay,
please.
that's easy, yep. I can do that. Excellent. The camera contract is signed for the camera, and I call the manufacturer to be here within 2 weeks. So within 2 weeks, we can start doing our cammering of the infrastructure specifically to Swiss Beach.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna get into Swiss Beach. The 2 new laborers are here. They're working now for us, so we have the 2 extra staff. So starting next Monday, we're gonna dedicate time in Swiss Beach, and I'll bring the map for you. And if you remember the Swiss Beach, I shouldn't say remember, I apologize. In Swiss Beach, we have some I&I identified by an engineering firm, OSD. So in the Ruggles area, there's been some excessive identified, and we're gonna go after that excessive, and also regular I&I because it's a capacity issue for us. So what we're going to do with the camera is we're gonna go to each and every line, we're gonna take out our Vector, and we're gonna clean the line, and then we're gonna put the camera in the line, and we're gonna study it. We're gonna look at the cracks, we're gonna look for breaks, and look for the unevenness, whatever the conditions of those pipes are, because that's gonna guide us into making the best decision to make a repair. I have a contract from Green Seal, which I'll bring to you next week, I'll put it in next week's thing, but about actually doing that assessment, because we have a master contract with Green Seal. And to answer your question, is Green Seal in these zones, Green Seal is the lead engineering firm on these grants, and they bought in GHD to do things that they may or may not be able to do. And all engineering firms, consulting firms, they're all not masters of everything. And what they do is you hire a lead engineering firm, and they bring people in that may, something that may be out of their expertise, they bring consultants in. And that's common in the industry, because we all don't know everything about everything, and engineers are the same. So the camera truck will be here, so we'll start doing that process. We have one gentleman that's certified. It's PACP, which is certified, which is recognized nationally by the DEP, EPA, to do these inspections, interpret them, and to write reports.
That works
And-
in your plant?
Correct, Ron Goodbout. And I'm going to go, we're getting ready to do a class. I'm meeting with Laurie next week, Laurie from Wright Pierce, to teach another class. So I'll get certified and John will get certified. So there'll be three of us out there, because what the criticalness of the certification is, if we ever apply for grant or borrowed money, it has to be signed off, these reports, by a certified individual, has to sign off on this to apply for grants or borrowing money. So we have somebody in-house to do that, so we're gonna move forward. And so this is beginning next week. This camera's a big part of this. The manhole inspections is huge, so we're starting that process.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Who's your assistant operator now?
Brian,
Brian Miller, okay. Now, does he take these different classes and get certifications to do
Some.
this kind of stuff?
some he does, and so, it's, yeah.
I'm just curious, is there somebody, I mean, God forbid, but, I mean, you always look, if you get hit by a truck, you've got somebody that knows what you know, and
Absolutely,
so you have that.
absolutely. So what I do, to answer that question.
Cross-training.
What I do is that everything I know, I pass down.
Yeah.
You see, and let me give you the caveat, because I can pass anything down, but you have to be willing to take it. It's like a gift. I can give you all the gifts, but if you don't accept that gift, it means nothing.
Right.
And that's life. So it's same with education. We spend $10,000 a year in education. We send people to classes, the union mandates, we do all those things. But if people don't take that knowledge and don't digest it and make it part of their self, then it's useless. We're wasting money. So to answer your question, yes, I have Brian as an assistant. I have an assistant that does all the process. I have an assistant that does maintenance. So all three of them are
All three of
involved.
them. Oh, okay.
Absolutely. So when I go on vacation, we designate or delineate all the responsibilities, and I give them to each one of those managers to do while I'm gone.
So you've got three managers. That
Yes, I
was my
do.
question.
Yes, I do. I have three managers that do this. And so what I do is, on vacation, and I've been called nuts, but every morning from 6:30 to 7, or 7:30, depending on what's going on, is that I have my communication with my managers, no matter where I am in the world. And we do that every single day to make sure if there's anything that I need or anything I can facilitate, we do that. And I do that before I retire at night, and then we communicate by email or whatever. And so we put that in place, and we do that every time that I'm not there, to make sure things keep rolling. So that's to answer your question. Absolutely. Absolutely. And in that camera, I want to point out that we're a member of the NJPA, National Joint Powers Alliance. And what that is, it's out of, I believe it's, let me see if this right, I want to say Wisconsin. It's a state bidding process that is national. And we bought that camera, we're paying $69,000 for it. When I went out for estimates before because I got to know what type of procurement I got to do, the average price was $80,000 to $140,000.
I remember you said that.
They were huge. Through NJPA, we're able to buy that same equipment for $69,000. And so we're part of it. I'm also, I want to show you something else. I had them come in this week under that contract and evaluate my uniform. I spend $13,000 a year in uniforms by union contract for my workers. They're going to give me the exact same uniforms, apples for apples, for $6,000 less.
Wow.
So to me, that's significant. And that's why, and I'm pushing, and Attorney Bowen vetted this. I talked to Mr. Song about this, and we've been doing this since last October when I really first started joining. And now we're officially there, and we're saving money. And I can give you the booklet, and everything you can imagine is in there. Case loader, Caterpillar loader. We also have somebody coming down on the town's behalf, because I bought this to Mr. Menard. He's going to save money for the town with his workers. I also have the ability to get in a contract with salt. It's a modified salt approved by the EPA, because we have some sensitive areas, waterways, cranberry bogs, and he may be able to get it cheaper than regular salt. So it's worth looking into. So we're members of this National Joint Powers Alliance, and it gives us the opportunity. And remember, it's a procurement process that's already been vetted. Their procurement regulations are greater than Massachusetts, because we vetted that out. They do more. When I called the Inspector General, they said make sure they do the minimum procurement for the state of Massachusetts, and they far exceed that. And so when we buy from them, technically, we can just go and buy because it's already been vetted. But what we do is we take 3 or 4, like we bought the loader, we could have gone to 1 state contract, but we went to 4. We went to Case, we went to Caterpillar, we went to John Deere, we went to JCB. And all were relatively close, but what the difference is their warranties and their services, and there's some little different things that make a difference, but they're all under contract, they've all been vetted. And so instead of just picking one, we looked at 4, and we're gonna demo the CAT tomorrow, just so we can make the best decision on all areas. So by joining these organizations, it takes some burden off Rebecca, plus it's already been vetted, and we get the best deals for the ratepayers. So we're pretty excited about the NJPA.
I hope JCB isn't a.
You ever see one of those things?
Oh, gee.
Yeah,
I've seen many of them.
but we had to look at them. See, I wasn't as familiar as you are with them, so I had to look at them. It's okay. Hey, thanks. But it was just, it was fun. But we did see it. We did see it. So, but we did them all just to make sure we get the best bang for our buck. And the next thing I want to talk about is I was with Bob Ethier and DEP yesterday, Mr. Whiteside from the DEP. I got a call that one of our local businesses may be adding oil to the sewer. So I went out there, and in the back of these buildings, it's a couple of buildings owned by one property owner, and they were separated, divided by fence, and so they were renting out different areas of that property to different businesses. In the back of the business was we're considering to be a 6-inch cleanout, and what they were doing is they had put a concrete pad around that cleanout, and it just was stained of oil. And around that was motors and all kinds of things. So we didn't catch anybody doing anything. We can make some guessing. So what I said to the DEP, what I would do is I would cap that, and I'll put a lock on it because there's a locking mechanism, and I'll put the lock that we own and keep a key here at the department and give the Board of Health one in case there's a sewer issue that we may need to enter that pipe to jet rod or whatever. But we're going to take away all ability for them to use it. I called the property owner, and she was very cooperative and agreed with us and whatever we can do. So we're going to seal that up. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because later on, for one of the things we're talking about in the future is industrial pretreatment program. And one of the issues is these garages that have bays is gas and oil separators, which we don't seem to have any in the town of Wareham today. We don't have many. And so what that does is between the discharge when it comes out of the building and when it comes to us, there's a gas separator put in. And what that does, it collects the gas, the oil, the hydrocarbons, brings them to the surface, and lets the water go through. That's a state plumbing code. It's a code. It's a Massachusetts state plumbing code that if you have an overhead door, I believe the dimension is 12 foot wide, whatever it is, that you can pull a car into, then you need to put drains, and you have to put that oil separator. And so when we talk about industrial pretreatment, those are things that we need to talk about to protect the system. Because I don't know how long we've been taking oil. Now, it's granted it's got to go through a manhole, 3 pump stations, and then to us. And by the time we may not see it fully here, but it has the potential. Because maybe if we didn't stop, it could have been gasoline next week. It could have been something, we don't know what. And I don't know how many of these are out there. So the reason I mention that is that in our industrial pretreatment, as we move forward, we need to consider these things and how do we stop these things from maybe happening. Thank goodness somebody, and there was a complaint to the Board of Health, the DEP, and they involved me. So thank goodness somebody saw something. They just didn't turn their head. They complained because it could have been something that could be detrimental to our system down the road. That'll come under pretreatment. And we did mitigate it, and great cooperation.
Those separators, Guy, they have to be maintained too, don't they?
Once
Similar
year
to
you
a
get-
grease trap.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like a grease trap, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Once a year you clean them off, and what they're designed for is to protect the sewer. Because the potential, and we talk about these things all the time. I have a garage and people say, well, what can happen? Well, I can pull my car in your garage and lose my gas tank. Where's that gasoline going to go? If you have a drain and you tight the system, you tell me where that gasoline's going to go. Oh, it'll evaporate, don't worry about it. And let's say you don't have an internal drain system. And where does it go, out the door? Now that's a potential to a catch basin, which again impacts our waterways. So we have to consider, especially properties that are on sewer. How do we protect the sewer? That's our obligation at all times, to protect the sewer. So that's why they're important, and they are maintained, like grease traps, like everything else.
So this is now locked?
Yes.
Covered and locked.
Yes, and we got permission from the owner. I want to emphasize that, because while we're there, the renter of that property, the business owner said, yeah, absolutely. DEP agreed, the Board of Health, we were all in agreement. But as I'm driving away, I'm saying, but he's not the owner of that property. So I called the owner and she said, absolutely. And she was really great about it, thanked us, and she'll talk to her tenant. And it really worked out well. And so I'm pretty pleased with the results. I really, truly am. Everybody cooperated. We avoided something that could have been really catastrophic, and the potential of being catastrophic. And everybody, from the guy that was, everybody cooperated.
Well, you were
So-
protecting the owner by doing that, actually.
yeah, so
You
I just-
did them a service.
So we worked out well for us. We're pretty excited about that. And that's pretty much it. Again, the industrial pre-treatment, as we talk about getting further and further along with our rate setting, we're gonna need to talk about that, because the reason I put it on here is I'm gonna give you a couple examples, Bill Ricker and Rockland, of their sewer ordinances that addresses industrial pre-treatment, it addresses sewer banks, and all the other things that we may wanna consider moving forward. And you'll have time to, it's pretty thick, so you may want weeks and weeks and weeks to digest it or read over it, and then set a meeting some point in time before we actually get into the rate setting and what we're going to do. We may or may not need to incorporate some of this in there, so we can work towards that also. That's why I put that in there. Switch speech, again, I've got a contract I'm gonna submit to you folks. I've been an engineering firm, and what I would recommend, just my recommendation, is that we bring that engineering firm and you interview them and ask them, and you've got the paperwork they're planning on doing, what the cost is, and you interview them and you can ask them questions, and then we can move forward or not move forward, whatever the case may be. So
Okay.
we'll do that. And Granicus, I talked to Granicus, I don't know if you remember, we talked about website and access. Well, Granicus is a government website creator, and I think what the fee is, it's like a couple, $300 a month, and what they do is they maintain that, and it does all kinds of things that I wouldn't even be able to talk about. Minutes of meetings, they do minutes of meetings automatically, they do all kinds of things, so through other websites. So I've invited her here with your permission, the 18th, we said it tentatively, and you tell me, and they're gonna present to the board what they're all about, what they can do, and then leave you with that, and you can decide how you, if or anything. But I think we should at the very least have them give us a presentation, because it's interactive. It's a website that all our customers can come to. If we had a project going on, it'll be on the website. We can put videos, educational videos, as far as what not to flush, what to flush. So it gives us our communication constantly between us and our customers, you see, and you can make it as much as you want or as little as you want.
And this will also play into, this will be designated just for the water pollution control facility.
Yes, ma'am.
And the, for instance, our odor control problems, they can go there, it'll be on the website, a calendar of whatever maintenance.
Yes.
And
Yes,
if we have any unexpected odor problem they can look there.
Yes, and they can even type in, they can even communicate with us. Hey, listen, I'm smelling something. Hey, listen, what's going on tomorrow? So there's that communication. So that's that instant communication that we can consult. And she'll explain in detail. Let's say at 8 o'clock at night they type in, we get there in the morning, it's gonna alert us, and we're gonna open that, and it's gonna tell, and we're gonna have that communication, and we're gonna be able to get right back to them. So it's interactive. They can have their computer, we can have ours through this website, and it's interactive. So it offers a lot, and and she'll explain to you, as she did to me, it's all over the country, it's it's called government interaction. And today, more than ever, more and more people are interacting with government. They want to know what's going on, and this brings credibility, and it brings, openness, if you will, because you have to, it's just that open communication. It really does. Transparency, all those things that we talk about, this brings it about. And it's important for our customers to be able to know that, we have their back, and we do, everything we do is in their best interest. May not seem that way at times, but that's our ultimate goal.
So they're gonna be coming the 18th of June.
Yes, ma'am. I told her I'd call and confirm it because I couldn't give her a definitive date, but if that's okay with the board, you can get back to me, then I will call her and say that's a go, or we can change it, whatever the case may be.
Does anybody have any,
Fine with me.
is that fine? How about you,
That's fine.
Donna?
Fine with me.
Okay, then we'll make it the 18th.
And that's all I have. Thank you for your time. If you have anything for me,
Thank you.
I'll definitely. And Madam Chair, before I want to talk, we talked about in that presentation, we have companies that we contracted to, we're not paying any money, but they're pump companies that can bring me a pump in a matter of a minute that can move 1 million gallons a minute. We also have pumpers that have tractor trailers fleets of them that we can call, will be here to a minute. Because I worry about Narrows, which is 300, it does about between 300 and 400,000 gallons a day is what that brings to the plant. And it covers so much of the town and some of the critical areas of the town. If I was to lose that pump station, it's critical. So I would have to move that product to the treatment plant. So we have a company that we've already had them there, they fitted our valves. So if that pump station goes down, they'll bring a pump, we'll set it up, we'll go inside, actually tie it to our force main and just keep it going. So we've thought about a lot of these issues because we have to think about it because we're in the middle of hurricane season.
Right.
It started today, yesterday, or the 1st. So we think about hurricanes all the time, and if it takes out that pump station, how do I keep that water flowing? So because of the hurricane preparedness that we're in the middle of doing now, we've already put some of those things into place.
Yeah, my concern was just, you know, some of the, I know they felt they had to catch us up because there was a split between it was a different board and this was this board, but I would have liked to have seen it. I know the winter caused them not to be able to go out and do the inspections that they had to do to take the pictures because of those problems. But I think to me, there's an urgency in trying to get as much grant money and as many things done as possible with grant money not costing our ratepayers any more than they already have. In fact, I'll speak to that in new business. That's the only problem I had with that. I just felt like I had, with Mr. Schrader last week, I just felt like he had rehashed what we already had. He didn't integrate the GHD capital improvement plans into his presentation. So I thought it was a waste of time and money that he just didn't have that already done. I was very disappointed, and in fact, I'm going to call him and kind of just remind him that he needs to have the figures, because as it was in the newspaper that we did vote for that hybrid system, but he also put figures in there which I felt was very unfair to the board, because the board had discussed that we were not going to take those figures, that we were going to come up with different figures.
And that was the only reason I didn't want to vote for the hybrid.
Exactly.
Because that was the only reason. I'm very much in favor of going to the hybrid, but I wanted more information.
Exactly.
And I didn't want it to hit the newspaper like it did.
And you're right, and I was very disappointed in that, because I felt that that did us a disservice, and that we had said that these are not the figures. They're not even tentative figures, because the capital improvement plan is not integrated into that, the rate system yet. And we still have, when we have the pump stations, and there's going to be more money integrated into that. So we don't know at this point what the rate is going to be. So I felt that that was very unfair to the sewer board. It didn't, you know, this has been going on since 2013. It was time to pull the trigger and make a decision one way or the other. Yes, we are going to the integrated system, the hybrid system, but certainly I was not happy with the way that was reported.
And I agree, Madam Chairman, and one of the reasons why they asked for a couple of members to meet with them is so we can discuss some of those numbers that are hypothetical without discussing in public. And not that we want to hide anything, but because they're so hypothetical, that people will take that hypothetical number and run with it. And so the idea was
Which
to do
they
that
did.
so you can play with hypothetical numbers. And that's the
And
reason.
when you were going to meet with, I believe, Donna and Sue is going to meet with you and with Michael Schrader, and iron this out, so that when he comes this next time, he's well prepared to give us a full scope of what this entails, because I think, you know, we've seen the same presentation 3 times now.
Right. And I think now that you're on board and said we want to move forward, I think now he's got to divert his attention from what he was doing, because he spent a year or more directed at a certain pace in the way things are going to be done. Now he has another board, so I think.
And our pace is faster.
That's right, so it's your decisions, and yeah, absolutely, and I think that may be adjustment for him, and I think it's a good adjustment for him also, because these things are better if you keep them going, because if you start spreading them out too far, all the work you've done, you lose some of it and the momentum goes, and so I think your point to let's just keep moving is important.
And in all fairness, the selectmen had the town business and everything else
1,000
to deal
things to
with
do.
too, so they
Absolutely,
just had so much on their plate.
absolutely, absolutely.
So we're devoting a lot of time we're devoting a lot of time every week to nothing but sewer, so I think we will move at a quicker pace.
Absolutely, and again, it's a great point, because they're responsible, their plate is full with everything,
Exactly.
everything.
Exactly.
And you just can't do it all.
And we're
so.
just doing this, and this seems like very overwhelming at times.
Yeah, we've had massive amounts of paperwork to digest in a very short span of time, and I think we've done a very good job with all we've had to look at. And there'll probably be more going forward.
Oh, yeah.
So, but I would, I don't like to waste time when you're just going to give me the same presentation over with, because we could have.
But a couple of our members didn't get the first one. They weren't here for the first one,
No,
were
but
they?
it was in their book. It was in their book. That entire
Okay.
presentation was in the book, even with the incorrect numbers. So, Guy had provided that for us. So, if you looked under that tab, it was
Yeah.
in the book, all written out.
And I want to say something, and this is to everybody, even non-civil users. I met with Joe Costa the other day when I was doing one of the grants, and he pointed something out to me that we lose sight of. The town of Wareham has done more than most communities, if not all communities, in the state of Massachusetts in protecting their coastal waters. And he made that clear. We've gone above and beyond, and we've really stepped to the plate to address the issues. And sometimes people call us a blue-collar, not wealthy community. We've done so much with so little that we really need to be proud of the things that we've done in this town, especially when it comes to sewer, specifically to sewer. We've done more than the average bear. And we have a plant that is probably, in his words, second to none in the state of Massachusetts. So I think there's a pride there that I have, because I have the privilege of being at that plant on a daily basis. And that speaks to all the people that have been before us, and it's speaking to you folks and where you're going with this. So to me, it impacted me. When he said that to me, I was like, wow, because you sometimes lose sight of that. You truly do. But we've done so much with so little that I think, as a town, we need to acknowledge that.
But again, we have, but again, only 50% of the town is paying for it too.
I understand.
So we have to protect those people
Absolutely.
and look out for their investment
Absolutely.
that they have too.
That's how I look at the ratepayers.
Yeah.
I look at this as a business, and our ratepayers are the shareholders, and
Mhm.
they expect, and you give them a great product. If anybody goes down to the river to watch what comes out of there, what went in and what comes out is a great product.
Mhm.
And so we are answerable to the ratepayers,
That's right.
because they are shouldering this entire burden of cleaning up Buzzards Bay on their backs.
No.
So we can't lose sight of that
No.
fact.
Absolutely.
I fielded a few questions on how to set the rates and what we're looking at, and my answer was to reinforce the fact that all we agreed to was to tell them to pursue that direction. But do we have a final decision? No.
That's right.
And I also reinforced the fact that we want it to be fair. It's big money,
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
so I agree.
That's what I went home with, because I said, gee, I descended from that vote, and I said, but I agree, we want to move forward, but we didn't agree on any numbers or
Right.
anything like that. We want to be fair.
Right.
And I think we're all sitting here.
It's interesting how some things come out
Yeah, exactly.
to the public. Well, you're gonna do this, I said. Let me tell you what we're doing. There's been no decision.
That's correct.
Right. There is no decision, other than we are looking into this hybrid, and if it turns out it's not, we can also rescind
That's right.
our decision. So I don't know what everybody's all upset about, because whoever, it's been going on 3 years. It's time now to, get off your haunches and do something, move forward.
And it's in the best interest of the ratepayer.
It's
to
most
move it
certainly is
forward,
in
to
the best
either put it
interest
to
of the
bed or move forward,
ratepayers.
instead of them being out there, what are we doing, what are we doing?
Right.
So you're doing I believe you're doing the right thing, but let's move forward and make some decisions, whatever it's going to be, because that's in the best interest of the ratepayers.
Right. And it may not be perfect even in its final analysis, and if it isn't, we can tweak it when we get there. But we've got to move ahead and try and fix this, because too long it's been unfair to the ratepayers.
There'll never be perfection. We strive for excellence, but we're certainly not gonna have the perfect answer.
No, we're
But We're
not,
gonna strive for
because it
excellence.
Right,
doesn't
exactly.
exist in this particular
Yeah.
case.
One question for me that came to mind after his presentation was, we need to look at the gallonage for the fixed charge. I know that was hypothetical, but I think that that's gonna be
Hi.
very important, how we
Yeah.
determine that.
Mhm.
I think you can more easily put a finger or a number on what it costs to treat up and over, because you have everything.
Absolutely.
But how are we gonna set that?
And water-
We need some guidance.
Water consumption, as you look at the numbers overall, is between 2,000, 3,000, not 6 or 9, you see, so that's the average consumer.
Yes.
So you gentlemen and ladies may decide that that's where we wanna be. And so it's your decision, it's your choice, so we stop playing with all these numbers. And that's why the working group is critical, because these are all hypotheticals, and you play with them. But to do it here, not that we're trying to hide anything, but we don't want anybody to be misled or misinformed.
Exactly.
You know, so, because it's all
I'm with you.
hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. So we may have executive sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I guess, Guy, if you're all set,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
we're all
Thank you.
set with you,
Thank you.
I'm looking for my gentle reminders.
Yes, I think I didn't get any this week. so
I
gave
have
them to you.
mine. Okay, so for unfinished business, which is next, we have a signature folder, and this is the policy statement where we're gonna do the abatements for, where we voted to do the abatements at the last meeting of the month. So I'm going to need everyone, and I'm gonna pass it around to sign this, please, for me. Thank you. Do you wanna
Mm-hmm.
please? Guy, I'm gonna put this back in the signature folder.
Okay.
As I told you, I already sent that letter up to Judy Luzon about, because we didn't have those minutes done. And I'm gonna put the minutes back in here. I think probably Sue will swing by, and she will sign her name on this policy,
Okay.
and on the two sets of minutes, I will give her a ring about doing that, because she needs to sign these. And next week, you'll be signing the minutes. Rebecca will be sending them to you.
Okay.
And is there any other unfinished business or that anybody wants to discuss? No? Jim, got anything? Donna?
No.
No, nothing.
Okay, then I have a little bit of new business, I guess. Well, I think this is probably still unfinished business. Since we signed the official service, the waiver of service from the Massachusetts Land Court at the request of Treasurer Foster to save the taxpayers some money, with your permission, I'd like to just send him a note, an email, or a formal letter, I'll do it either way, to to Treasurer Foster regarding the sewer commissioners being kept abreast of that land court case at 1815 Avenue.
Oh, okay.
Just so we're on record that we are still looking for the almost $7,000 when they do sell that property and the money gets allocated. It has to come before us for us to abate it. If not, and I think it was perhaps abated before when the
Yeah.
other,
What was the address there? Did you say?
it was 1815th Avenue
Oh,
was the
18, yeah,
Rotary
that's right.
property.
Yeah.
So, just to let him know that, and in conjunction with that, I'm also gonna speak to Attorney Bowen regarding his legal interpretation on the allocation of betterment taxes per Massachusetts General Law 60, Section 43. And at the same time, I'll give him a C. Powell reminder about getting that contract back to us so that they know that we are awaiting certain things and that we are not gonna, the abatement, and any of those abatements going forward, that we have to be kept in that loop. And then the last, and that's the, and I have one new business item. The finance director, or the treasurer, Mr. Foster, needs to develop a written agreement between the Water Pollution Control Facility and the town. This agreement, it will be a formula for calculating the enterprise fund indirect costs
Mm-hmm,
that is charged to the general
Right.
fund.
mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, I know that the Department of Revenue has cited not only the Water Pollution Control Finances in their letter, in the management letter to the town,
Right.
and they had instructed, said that Derek Sullivan, our town manager, should request and instruct Treasurer Foster to start working on this. And we're gonna need this by probably September 1st, this whole thing, because we're gonna be, in order to go for our rates and the 2017 budget. So we need this indirect cost agreement in place. We need to be vetting it and seeing what we think is a fair, consistent, and accurate account of what they're pulling out of the Water Pollution Control Facility and using for indirect costs, because last year, you will remember, it was $800,000. The previous year
Over
was
that.
$500,000, so we went up $300,000 in 1 year.
We used to be $1 million.
Yeah, well, that was when they had that, what was that called, that policy, no, it was
But
some,
that was illegal.
that was illegal, is right, and that was that system that they had in place, which they shouldn't have had in place. So now we have to have a written agreement signed off. I mean, if you look in your white book and read the enterprise rules
Yep,
of an enterprise fund, it's right in there.
exactly.
And I have been whining about this from the first time I got on the finance committee, that why isn't that in place?
Mm-hmm,
It needs to be in place. Now,
and it was addressed in the DOR report.
yes, and also in the water pollution control, and in the management letter to the town, it was
Yep.
addressed. They've asked them 3 different times to do it, and they haven't done it yet. And when I spoke to Derek about it at one of the finance committee meetings, he said, well, the 25% that John Foster's salary that is charged to the water pollution control facility, that's the beginning of it, but he needs to do a comprehensive, quantified, justified,
Exactly, and they have to approve it.
and I want to see all the documentation that goes behind it, and I want all the department heads are supposed to sign off on this. So, and then if we still don't like it, then the Department of Revenue can look at it and they can say it doesn't work. So we need that before the budget and before we set rates, because that's going to impact our ratepayers again. They pay twice. So that's the end of what I have today. The next meeting is the 11th, and I have the tie and bond is coming. Is he coming on the 11th?
Let me confirm it, I don't have that, I know it.
That's
don't
what
think-
I had, but I don't want to see him
We haven't
if he does not have what we want.
I think before we have him back, at the very least, that
He should send us,
Ms. Frank and
Yeah.
Ms. Sweeney should meet with him and sit down and go over some issues.
Yeah,
before-
yeah.
Very least before he comes back.
I
Right.
agree.
so the 11th right now, it looks like an open slate.
So I'll call him and remind him of that.
So
The
We'll see.
11th?
the 11th, he was supposed to come, but unless he has figures and meets with Donna and Sue prior to that, there's no sense of him coming and charging that off to us.
Then, Madam Chair, maybe the 11th, I'll have Green Seal come in and justify their costs for doing the work in Swiss Beach.
Yes, that would be good. Okay, so that's what we'll, and will they send us something ahead of time, Guy? Would you ask
Yes,
them to
I
send
have
us
the
something we can
actual-
read?
He sent me a copy of the contract, so everything's in there.
Okay,
I'll send each of you the contract so you can read it. It has the provisions, every cost broken down, the total cost over the years. I think it's a 2-year program to do Swiss Beach. Everything will be in there, and it's pretty good size, it's thick, so you can,
and we didn't get any grant money on that one?
No.
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 no. On that one there, so you're aware, there's, I think we set aside $700,000 or $750,000 for engineering for Swiss Beach.
Yes.
And that's what's
That's
paying
right,
for
too.
that. That's where that
Yeah.
money's coming from.
I was just wondering where he said that there was another grant. Mr. Janik mentioned another grant.
It's gonna be coming up soon.
Well, the one closes June 12th, we're not gonna make that.
No.
That's active, there's no way we can make that. That one's getting ready to close. If we could have made that, then we could have applied for grant money to do some repairs. But Mr. Janik and Mr. Cosmo was down there, there's grants coming out, and that's why on this, to get that, the newsletter's really good for you folks, because you'll see that. There's a lot of grants, and so we have opportunities that we need to strike, so, I'm glad you're
Quickly.
pushing it along, and as these grants come, we can really start whaling them.
Right. Okay, so then the next meeting will be Thursday, June 11th, and we will have a green seal in here regarding Swift Beach, and we should be looking in our email to find the contract and anything else we want to look up about it. I think there is
Yeah.
something in here about Swift Beach as well.
Yeah.
So, that being said, I'm
make a
looking for a
motion.
motion.
I make a motion for adjournment?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, 0. Abstain, 0. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.